Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Chris Link, and I'm at the Integrative Medicine Clinic, and we're going to talk about brain health tonight. I need a little bit of help from the audience. This is our third virtual conference. Stephanie Link is here helping us tonight, and I need to make sure that you all can see me and hear me out there before we get started. Now, Alzheimer's disease is really one of the very most important medical conditions. We know heart disease and cancer is a big deal. But now Alzheimer's disease is the sixth leading cause of death. It really takes away so much from us, from the person themselves as the neurons in their brain. And there's something like 100 billion neurons in the brain and 500 trillion connections between those neurons. As those things start to give way, they lose their personality, their memory, their capabilities, their relationships with their families and friends. It's a great loss for them, and it's even a greater loss for their family. And I'm sure that many of you, unfortunately, have had some experience, some friend or family member with this condition. Now, the sad part is that Alzheimer's disease, when it's in its full-blown form, is really not reversible. But the important thing now is that recent data tells us that about 40%, 4 out of 10 cases of Alzheimer's disease is indeed preventable, and we're going to talk more about that. So this is a very, very important illness for the 21st century, and there's much we can do about it with what we know right now in 2021. So again, thanks for joining us. I will answer questions at the end, and maybe even along the way if you put it in the chat box. Steph, my assistant here, may let me know about the particular question, and if it's relevant to what we're talking about right then, I might be able to answer it then. And also know that this is going to be recorded and it'll be available for all of you. Some people may want to listen to it again. Now, it's going to be an overview, but there's really going to be some science in it. For some of you that have a great background already in these sorts of things, it'll become pretty easy, but other people may need to go back through it. There we go. Many of you know me, some of you don't. I trained as an emergency physician, worked as an emergency physician from 1989 until 2009. I actually ran the emergency trauma center for a while here in Jefferson City, Missouri, and I could take care of, thankfully, with the good training and good experience, anything that walked in the door, from heart attacks to strokes, the multi-vehicle trauma patients, to asthma and allergies and lacerations, and just you name it, I could take care of it. But I wasn't great at taking care of myself. And with that, I reached out to try to learn how really best to take care of myself. And I found that integrative medicine was the best place to do that. Because there in integrative medicine, it's not relying on medications, it's relying on the things that help people get healthy and stay healthy. The pillars of health: sleeping well, great nutrition, great exercise, good social connections, et cetera. These things, not smoking, these things are highly important. And I had started to develop some chronic conditions, some pain and some early hypertension and weight around the middle. And once I got that dialed back in, I was much healthier, and I really wanted to bring it to our community. And that's when we opened the Integrative Medicine Clinic. So that's Dr. Link's story. This is another story that's really poignant to me. This woman is my mother. Her name is June. And when she was 62, living at home in Shrewsbury, Missouri, it was clear that things weren't quite the same anymore. She wasn't as engaged. She was a little forgetful, just becoming isolated. We knew things weren't right. And by the time she was 66, just 3 or 4 years later, she was clearly becoming demented. She was clearly forgetful. She was still the sweet mother mostly, but boy, there were times where she was belligerent. She moved into our house because she could no longer live alone. She lived with my wife, Terry, and my 5 children. It was wonderful to be able to take care of her, but it was sad to see what happened to her, how she lost herself, her memory, her many capabilities, her ability to communicate so well. She lost that. And this picture actually was her just a few days before she died. And one of the reasons that I have such a passion about brain health. Dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term. It really just means memory decline, cognitive global loss of mental function, possibly the ability to remember, to organize, to speak, to calculate, to see. Okay, and it can happen for many reasons. People can have multiple strokes. That's certainly a reason that a person may become demented. There's a condition called frontotemporal dementia. That's another occurrence. There's something called Lewy body dementia, which is often associated with Parkinson's. But the most important dementia is Alzheimer's, and it is associated with about 70% of dementias, and it's got to do with these amyloid plaques. I'll show you some pictures in these neurofibrillary tangles that really act to destroy nerve cells one by one. Memories go with them, and that's Alzheimer's disease, the very most important dementia. Now, it is defined as a syndrome of progressive cognitive decline, prominent memory loss, loss of independence, and often death within 10 years. And indeed, we first understood that my mother had some significant cognitive issues when she was about 62, and by the time she was 70, she indeed was dead, in large part because of Alzheimer's dementia. Now, the history here. Alzheimer's dementia was first diagnosed by Dr. Alzheimer's in early 20th century, in about 1906. Dr. Alzheimer admitted a woman named Augusta Dieter to a hospital in Frankfurt, Germany. It was called Ehrenschloss, and the common name for that hospital was the Castle of the Insane. Now, of course, that's not politically correct, but it tells you a little bit about the place. In the 1990s, they actually uncovered some of his records of this visit. And his journal entry went like this: a 55-year-old woman with memory loss, hallucinations, and screaming was admitted. He interviewed her. What is your name? She said, Augusta. What is your husband's name? She said, I believe Augusta. Where are you right now? Here and everywhere, here and now, she replied. She was known to cry in the night, and she would say, as a German woman, Mein Gott, ich habe mich verloren. And what she said there is, my God, I've lost myself. Very sad, very sad. And this psychiatrist with a microscope, Dr. Alzheimer's, did a postmortem on her and presented it to the major medical societies in 2006. He found a shrunken brain with plaques and tangles of amyloid and tau. And he noted that his presentation at this major medical conference was disregarded. They thought it was unimportant. They thought this condition, which is one of the most important medical conditions of the 21st century, was unimportant in the early 20th century. Part of the reason is that most people, that is, the average lifespan was about 45 years in 1906. Few people had Alzheimer's disease or dementia like this. In fact, the most common reason in 1906 to have dementia was because of syphilis and neurosyphilis and what that did to the brain. So they had no idea how important this condition would soon become. So some statistics. Alzheimer's disease right now is the 6th leading cause of death in the US. There are more deaths related to Alzheimer's disease than there are to breast or prostate cancer combined during any one year. 6 million patients right now have active Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to give you a more startling statistic in just a minute. We think that there'll be 16 million people in 2050 with active Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 3 seniors die with dementia. And there are no cures for Alzheimer's disease. Now, that is really bad news. It is estimated right now that there is about 330 million people in the US. Of those 330 million, 45 million of those people will likely have Alzheimer's disease before they die. So 45 million of the 330 million people that are alive in the US right now are likely to go on to have Alzheimer's disease. This is an enormous issue, an enormous burden for families, for our healthcare, for our country. And women make up about 65% of Alzheimer's cases, and they're 60% of the caregivers. There's no question that the burden of Alzheimer's disease disproportionately falls on women. This is the Alzheimer's Association recently. Alzheimer's disease is the only leading cause of death that cannot be prevented, slowed, or cured. Now, I'm going to tell you there's some new news about prevention, but this is what they said in 2018. And leading independent researchers have determined that it's become the nation's most expensive disease. And why is that? Because it's over $600 billion spent on this for things like healthcare, long-term care costs, but also because of all of the unpaid care that people give. Like, when my mother lived with us for those 5 years, there was always someone with her, always someone taking care of her. And we were pleased and honored that we could do that for her. And it was gracious of my wife to provide a lot of that care. But this is unpaid care that occurs in the US. Now, this is some self-portraits of a fairly famous American painter. His name is William Utermohlen. And in 1967, you can see his self-portrait. And then again in 1996, things are changing. Soon after that, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. 1997, 1998, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see, indeed, the sophistication of his paintings they're diminishing, they're dwindling, he's indeed losing himself. And the thing to take from this is that and we'll show more information about this, but he didn't just get Alzheimer's disease in 1996. He was developing Alzheimer's disease way back in the 1970s and 1980s. And that's when you need to prevent it, because once a person has serious Alzheimer's disease, there's little we can do. We need to be preventing it before then. And there's actually signs, new data, new information that these things are happening much, much earlier. And if you think about it like coronary artery disease, that is the blocking, the plaques, the atherosclerosis that happens in the arteries of the heart, those just don't start at the first heart attack. Those start some 20 years before that as well. So it's not terribly surprising that Alzheimer's may be similar to that. So on the right is a healthy, plump brain, where there is some room between some of those large gyri. Those are the big folds of the brain, and then the sulcus between those folds. But look on the left. This is a person that died from Alzheimer's disease, and the brain is severely shrunken and atrophied. Those deep furrows now, those sulci are huge. The tissue has degenerated significantly. We need to be working to prevent Alzheimer's disease when the brain is still healthy, primarily. Now on the left is the brain. This is a pictorial diagram of a healthy brain. It's thick and it's full, and the neurons are normal. And there's a place right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but this area here is where the hippocampus is, a very important structure in memory. And over here is this shrunken brain of an Alzheimer's patient with a shrunken hippocampus, which is the major memory center. And there is the amyloid plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles that the tau that are so involved with the pathology, the process that leads to the brain degeneration. This is a test. It's called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Take a drink of my sparkling water there. And this is a very common paper and pencil test that we give in the clinic. It takes about 10 minutes, and it tells us a whole lot about the likelihood of cognitive decline and the likelihood of dementia, and particularly Alzheimer's type. Now, on the left, we ask them to draw a clock at 10 after 11, and you can see that this is distorted. In the middle is a line diagram between letters and numbers that should be done sequentially, and it's out of sequence. And on the right, we ask them to draw a cube, and again, you can see there's some deficiencies there. This person clearly has cognitive decline. There's some other parts of this test as well, but this is a very common test we use. So is there a silver bullet, and will there be a silver bullet for Alzheimer's disease? There's been about 250 drugs, 244 drugs tested for Alzheimer's disease between 2000 and 2018. Mostly these were looked at to stop the production or clear amyloid plaques. Only one drug out of 244 was approved in those 18 years. It was called Namenda in 2003, and it's really not very effective. So we are hopeful that there's going to be a silver bullet, and I'm more hopeful about the research now than ever before. but we're not holding our breath because there's things we can do now to make a difference. Let me talk about Alzheimer's research funding. Now, this is a slide that I took from a 2018 talk, and I'm going to update it towards the end. Cancer research receives about 5 to 10 times more funding than Alzheimer's disease, though Alzheimer's disease is the most expensive illness. So that's out of proportion, isn't it? The US spends more on popcorn, Viagra, and anti-aging cream than we do on Alzheimer's research. Well, that's despicable. We need to be doing much more than that. The US spent $1.8 billion on Alzheimer's disease research in 2018. We spent $600 billion on the cost of Alzheimer's care in that year. Now, in the mid-1990s, at the peak of the HIV epidemic, we were spending $26 billion a year on an epidemic, a very important epidemic that we've made remarkable strides, and people are not dying from that anymore, or very rarely. So the good news is over the last couple of years, there's been a significant increase in research. And each morning, I read medical research before I come to the clinic, and I'm seeing each morning 1, 2, or 3 new papers on research related to Alzheimer's disease. I'm very enthusiastic. I think things are going to change here in the next 10 years. I think we're going to find more treatments. So now we'll get to good news, more good news. What we know is that the silver bullet so far hasn't worked. So we need to use the silver buckshot approach, because the data tells us right now in 2021 that it works. So this is a paper from just a couple of years ago. And what it looked at is if we use in people with elderly folks with cognitive decline, if we use diet, exercise, cognitive training, we'll talk about all of these, and reduce vascular risk factors like their cholesterol and control their hypertension, what happened? Well, they followed more than 1,200 Finnish men and women that were between 60 and 77. In the intervention group with a healthy diet, exercise, muscle training, cardiovascular training, brain training, and good care of metabolic and vascular risk factors, we'll talk more about that they were significantly improved. A 25% higher function in the intervention group, 83% better executive function, decision-making, and 150% better processing speed. So there was a clear difference over this 2-year study. So this is one study that's very important. Let me show you even a more important study. So this was published in 2019 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, and it was done at the Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York. And they did an individualized management of patients at risk for Alzheimer's disease. And they looked at patients purely, number one, that were purely there for prevention. Number two, people that had mild cognitive impairment. And number three, people with early Alzheimer's disease. What they did is they made sure their blood pressure, their blood sugar, their cholesterol, their exercise, their sleep, their stress, their hormones, their vitamins, and their brain activities were optimized. Important finding, amyloid plaques were found in many of these people decades before there was any cognitive decline. There are new PET scans, these advanced scans that we can actually see amyloid and the tau from the neurofibrillary tangles as well. The outcome, they followed these people for 18 months. Those with early Alzheimer's disease actually had improved cognitive function. Never have we seen this before. In every previous study, people with early Alzheimer's disease only got worse over the next 6, 12, 18 months. Quite amazing. This was done by Dr. Richard Isaacson at Weill Cornell. It should be 2 L's. There's a link to his YouTube video. And anybody that is interested in this particular video, it's about 5 minutes, and he discusses the results of this trial. Put in there, Dr. Richard Isaacson, Weill Cornell, in YouTube, and put in, if you can't put in the link specifically, put in Alzheimer's disease, and this will come up. And he talks about this very, very important study. Okay, so let's talk more about this individualized therapeutic program. We're going to talk about a brain healthy diet, why and what to avoid for brain toxins, We're going to talk about brain boosting lifestyle. We're going to talk about optimizing labs and replace hormones and supplements to support brain health. In essence, we're going to talk about the silver buckshot that is known to make a difference, that is reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease in 40% of people right now in 2021. Okay, now we know that, excuse me just a second. We know that muscles improve with optimizing diet, lifestyles, exercise, hormones, and supplements. We see this all the time in our clinic. And it's not a bit surprising that brain health can do the same thing too. So let's talk about nutrition. Now, many of you have seen me talk about nutrition before, so we're going to go over the quick basics. Processed carbohydrates and sugar, they are nothing but harmful for humans. It's not that you can never have them, but you don't want to have these very often. Too much sugar, too much carbohydrates, too many chemicals, too many process concerns. These lead to inflammation, increased blood sugar, increased cholesterol, increased inflammation, just not good. So in general, we want to eat a whole food diet. In generally a lower carbohydrate diet with plenty of vegetables, meat, fish, nuts, great oils, okay? You don't see much breads on this. I'll go into specifically the ketogenic diet, which is even more powerful for brain health, but this is where most of us should start for prevention. Colorful, nutrient-dense diet, where the base of that diet is things like cabbage and carrots and broccoli and cauliflower and sweet potatoes and fish and healthy meats, great oils like olive oil, and a little bit of fruit and cheese and dairy and butter is just fine in modest amounts, and a little bit of wine. We know that fasting helps, and it doesn't have to be prolonged fasting. Fasting of about 13 hours or 14 hours overnight and 3 hours before bed. Time restricted eating, this is called the 13-3 diet. You might have your first meal about 8 a.m., your last meal by 7 p.m. It's fine to drink water before and after, and even coffee before in the morning, but you want to keep your calories into that window during the day, and this helps our brain and our bodies heal better. It lowers our blood sugar, lowers our cholesterol, it helps us burn fat, and it naturally puts us into ketosis. And the brain loves ketosis. I'll show you more about that here shortly. So the ketogenic diet. So I talked a little bit about PET scans. This is one particular PET scan where this scan of the brain is looking at the use of the brain of energy. And on the left is a brain that's normal. And where the red is, and the yellow and the orange, that's where energy is being used vitally. That's where blood sugar is coming to the brain and it's fueling the activity of the brain. Well, on the right, you see the Alzheimer's brain. And the Alzheimer's brain has few areas of the red and hot and the warm and the yellow and the orange and a lot of blue. And that blue area is where there's not much molecular energetic activity. Part of that is because they've lost brain tissue. The other part of it is they've lost the ability to use glucose, blood sugar, as an energy source. As Alzheimer's brains get older, even people without Alzheimer's, we all lose the ability to some extent of our brain to use blood sugar effectively. We may lose the ability by 20 to 30% effectively to use blood sugar as an energy source for the brain. We never, ever lose the ability to use ketones. Ketones are the breakdown products, small molecules that are broken down from healthy fats, can be saturated fats or monosaturated fats, that then are distributed and go to the brain, and the brain loves to use it for energy, and it can make up the difference. This is what a ketogenic diet looks like. So about 25% of the diet of calories come from meat and fish and protein. You eat more fats that might come from eggs and avocados and olive oil and butter and maybe even a little bit of bacon. And then most of your diet is healthy plants, particularly low carbohydrate plants like the the link, the greens and the peppers and the tomatoes, all of these sorts of things that are low, and you can think of many, many more that are low carbohydrate, nutrient dense, and colorful. And you add a little bit of berries, a little bit of nuts, but the breads and the potatoes aren't on this diet. Now, this is one of the most nutritious diets on the planet because ounce for ounce, it has more nutrients, more vitamins, more nutrition than almost any other diet. It just doesn't have the carbohydrates, which gives the body the capacity to use ketones more frequently for the energy for the brain. Okay, now passing from nutrition onto exercise. Exercise is one of the keys. So you want to get your heart rate up about 20 minutes a day whenever possible. You may not be able to do that all the time, but for people that are really demonstrating any sort of cognitive decline, aerobic activity is important. Resistance training too, that strengthening of the body makes a difference in the brain health as well. When we do this, when we do the aerobic training, get our heart rate up, or just long brisk walks, or some body weight training or other training that's noted there, it helps our insulin work better. It lowers inflammation. It increases something called BDNF, and that's the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's the factor that helps brain cells get stronger and live longer. And it increases the size, this major center in the brain for memory, the hippocampus. So exercise is a key. It's one of those buckshots that can help prevent Alzheimer's disease. This is a study where they looked at women, and these women were it was a 44-year-long study, and it was done in Europe. And they tested women's fitness in midlife. So when they were about 40 or 50 years old, and they put them on an exercise bike. And the women that had the greatest fitness, that's in the green bar on the right, had the lowest likelihood of Alzheimer's. So women with low fitness had about a 33% risk of Alzheimer's disease over the next 44 years. Women that exercised modestly, had medium capacity on the exercise bike, had about a 25% risk of Alzheimer's disease over the next 44 years. And the women who were fit in midlife had about a 3% chance. That is an amazing difference, and it tells you how important fitness is in reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease as we get older. Now, brain exercises are important too. And there's a couple of good ones out there. You may have seen these on commercials. You can certainly look these up online, Lumosity and Brain HQ. The one that has the most data is Brain HQ. There is more than 130 papers shown that Brain HQ makes a difference in cognitive function, particularly when it's combined with this silver buckshot approach of great nutrition, great sleep, exercise, etc. It's another one of the buckshots in this important treatment for the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Hormone therapy. So this is a study from from Mayo Clinic. It was in the American Academy of Neurology, and what they showed that women who had hormone replacement therapy, postmenopausal women, followed for 7 years, and they had at least 4 years of HRT or hormone replacement therapy, that the transdermal estrogen, that is estrogen that they put on their skin, was associated with a lower global cortical amyloid deposition. So we can see amyloid now on PET scan, and it was much lower. And actually, areas of the brain like the hippocampus were larger. Hormones play a role. And I'm gonna just reflect back to my mom. She had a hysterectomy and her ovaries out when she was 39. And so her body was deprived of the important estrogen that she would have had for the rest of her life. And clearly a cycle for the next 10, 12, 13 years after that would have been very likely. That clearly played a role in her early dementia. We need to avoid brain toxins as well. We call these dementigens, things that increase the likelihood of dementia. Alcohol. Excessive alcohol It's a toxin, folks. It's, just remember that. Modest amounts, maybe a glass or two or three during the week for a woman, and maybe a few more, 4 or 5 or 6 glasses of wine for a man over a week. It can be a safe amount, but more than that is not, it's not to the benefit of most individuals, certainly not for their brain. Things like antihistamine, Zyrtec, Claritin, Benadryl, Zyzal, these things have been shown over time, particularly when they're used long-term, to decrease cognitive function. Benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax and Ativan, if you use these, use them as little as possible because they do add up in regards to taking a toll on your neurons and your synapses that make everything work. Opiates like codeine and hydrocodone and morphine and tramadol, these things as well. There's some suggestion that PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors, the purple pills, can reduce cognitive function. There's some evidence that the statins can too. Now, I don't think the evidence for either one of those is excessively strong. And if a person really needed those medications, I think they should use them. But if you don't need them, it's better to be off them. General anesthetics, people that have multiple surgeries have a higher risk. Mercury and lead, and there is lead in our, across our nation, there is lead in our pipes. And in many communities, there's more lead in the water than is desirable. There's no question about that. People in Flint, Michigan, but other places like Newark, New Jersey was just found to have significant amount of lead. And then there's mycotoxins from mold that are associated with water damaged buildings. And there's some suggestion that 30 to 40% of the buildings in our country have some significant water damage. So the brain is sensitive. We need to watch the toxins. We need to make sure we get good sleep and manage stress. So this this is an amazing breakthrough I wanted to share with everybody. There's a revolutionary treatment that makes you live longer. It improves your memory, creativity. It makes you look more attractive, keeps you slim, lowers your cravings. It protects from cancer and dementia. It wards off colds and flu. It lowers the risk of heart attack, stroke, and diabetes. It improves mood, lessens depression and anxiety. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but just think about it. Would this be something you'd be willing to try if it was safe? Well, this is sleep. Sleep does all of these wonderful things for us. And this book here, Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker, is a fabulous read for anybody that's interested in this. Sleep is important. Refreshing, restoring sleep is very critical for brain function, 7 to 9 hours nightly. There's a very interesting system that we're learning about in the brain. It's called the lymphatic system. Many of you have heard about the lymphatic system. It's one of the ways that we kind of drain the fluid from the tissues of our arms and legs. And you might have seen people with swelling in their arms or legs related to lymphedema. Now there's a system in the brain, a lymph-like system that works very much during the time when we sleep, particularly deep sleep, and it washes away some of those plaques and tangles and amyloid. Very important. We're learning much, much more about this. We also know that REM sleep, that rapid eye movement sleep, is where we consolidate memories. Very important. Let's talk about stress management. And we could have talked the whole hour on this because this is a big factor in many people. And the reason it's a factor is chronic stress for many of us, and many of us are affected by it, increases cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that's released by stress, and it leads to hippocampal degeneration. And remember, hippocampus is this processing, it's the RAM of the brain. It's where we have rapid access to memories, and it degenerates with chronic stress, increased cortisol. It's a big problem, hippocampal degeneration, and then memory impairment. So working on our stress, really important with all of the things you can do from prayer to meditation to reading to communication with your friends and spouse and these sorts of things, not taking on too big of a load, all of these things to manage our stress is important. Big problem. Labs. So in Dr. Isaacson's Center at Weill Cornell, they look at all of these labs. They look at something called CRP. This is a common lab that can be ordered. It tells us about inflammation. They look at homocysteine. This is also a common lab. In fact, all of these are common I'm going to talk about. It tells us about sufficiency of the body, the right B vitamins. We look at things like the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. So now we know that certain fats, the omega-6, can be relatively inflammatory. And the omega-3s that come from fish oil and that come from seafood and come from certain plants like algae, these omega-3s and come from walnuts, for example, are really healthy and lower inflammation, and they can help the brain. We check the hemoglobin A1C, which is the average blood sugar, and we want this as low as possible because higher blood sugar leads to degeneration of tissue because the elevated levels of blood sugar in the blood kind of it latches on and kind of gloms onto the proteins in our body and brain, and it makes them dysfunctional. It kind of caramelizes them and makes them so they can't move and function as they need to. We look at important minerals like copper and zinc. Too much copper is not good for the brain. More zinc is. Vitamin D, we like levels of 50 or 60, so important to have this checked. Hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone. We want these in the optimal ranges for adults. Many of my patients have low levels, men and women, of their hormones. And then thyroid. So these labs need to be optimized. This is part of this overall individualized program where we try to specify what's needed for each individual to be most effective in their best health. These are some supplements. On the left is a group of foundational supplements that I think are good for most people that are concerned about their brain. A multivitamin, multimineral that's going to have things like, well, multiple different vitamins and minerals, particularly B's and A and so forth. The omega-3s, this is the oil that comes from fish. Vitamin D. This next one, curcumin/theracurmin, has been studied at the University of California, LA, UCLA, and people who take this have had better brain function over time. Magnesium is great for the brain, particularly magnesium threonate. Coenzyme Q10 is often low in adults older than 50, and it's critical for metabolism of the neuron. That is, for the neuron to have the energy it needs in its mitochondria so they can have the energy to perform the functions of memory, storing memory, retrieving memory, but also clearing out things like the amyloid plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles. There are some other additional supportive. Now, not everybody needs to take these. If you're doing everything else right and your risk is low, you don't need these. But if we're starting to see some concerns or there's a strong family history, low dose lithium, not the medication. Medication lithium is 900 milligrams. We're talking about 1 milligram, low dose. Melatonin at low dose, moderate dose, 3 to 6 milligrams. Ashwagandha is a Ayurvedic Indian herb that's been shown to be helpful for brain and decreasing amyloid plaques. There's a combination of glycine, which is an amino acid, with NAC, another amino acid, that acts together when it's given in a little bit higher doses to lower inflammation in the brain and improve cognitive function. Very recent study out of the University of Texas. DHEA and pregnenolone are over-the-counter building blocks to hormones that can be supported. And then there's a wonderful mushroom named lion's mane that is supportive for brain health. So these are some of the things that can be added. Not everybody needs all of them. Okay, so these are some books, and I want you to remember that all of this is recorded and you can come back to it. But on the left is a book that I've mentioned before. Some of you may have heard me say this, is Stress Less, Accomplish More by Emily Fletcher. She talks about the mechanisms and the detrimental effects of stress and what you can do to really reduce that, particularly doing meditation for 10 minutes or so daily. The Better Brain Solution is a wonderful book by Stephen Masley. The End of Alzheimer's is a book by Dr. Bredesen. And very recently is The XX Brain by Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who is one of the researchers at the Weill Cornell Medical Center in their Alzheimer's prevention clinic. They had the first Alzheimer's prevention clinic, and it started in 2013 by her and Dr. Isaacson. Dr. Isaacson is a brilliant man that graduated from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Medical School. That's the 6-year program for the exceptionally brilliant people that go to medical school right after high school. Some of you might know a doctor or two that have done that. Pretty unusual. To summarize, therapeutic program includes a brain healthy diet, avoiding brain toxins, brain boosting lifestyle, optimizing labs, and replacing hormones, supplements to support brain function. That is the silver buckshot approach, the one that we know now in 2021 makes a difference. I am very excited about that. I know that it can help many people. And I also know it'll help prevent other conditions like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. But I'll also tell you that I'm also really enthusiastic about what I'm seeing coming out of our research hospitals from around the country and around the world. We're going to learn more. We're going to learn much, much more about this. And I think it's going to be coming soon. I think over the next decade, we're going to have many more things we can add to this to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's in ourselves and in our family members. Getting to the end here, I want to just let you know that one of the missions of the Integrative Medicine Clinic and myself is to educate our community. I've recently given talks on aging well, and now this brain health talk, and I will continue to do that about monthly. The next talk is going to be about improving bone health. All of you are welcome, anybody that's interested, or if you have folks that are in your sphere of friends and family that are interested in bone health in particular, we'll be doing this in about a month or so. And I also speak for groups and organizations in regards to ways to improve health from the inside out, to decrease healthcare costs for organizations, and for community groups as well. You can reach the clinic if you're interested in that. And now we're to the questions phase. I hope you enjoyed this. I think it's such an important topic, and I hope you found things that you can take home and make a difference in your life. If you have any questions, please type it into the question area, and I'll be glad to answer a few as you like. Yeah, it may take a minute or so for the questions to start coming. I'll wait that for a few minutes. Anybody that feels like they need to go now, I'm not offended if you decide to move on. But if you're interested in having a question answered, please put it in, and I'm glad to do that. And I'm going to slide this over a little closer to Stephanie, my trusted assistant with the question, so I can.
The recording of tonight's presentation will email out to everyone. The link on YouTube will email you.
The first question was how the video can be available, and we will email it out to anyone that is involved here and that we have their email. And you're welcome to obviously view it again and even share it with your friends or family if you like. And Steph is working on the next question or two.
So my grandmother and mother both had Alzheimer's disease. So follow these steps and help for prevention.
This question was by someone who said that they had family members, a mother and a grandmother with Alzheimer's disease. And will these sorts of things help them? And the answer is yes. And so I don't know if that's a woman or a man, but those books I recommended by Dr. Bredesen and by Dr. Mosconi are great ways to gather more information. The book by Dr. Masley, and really this lecture, knowing that you put together the basics. You want to eat really well, colorful, nutrient dense, low carbohydrate, exercise as your body can. Keep your blood sugars low. Go to your doctor with those important labs and have those done and try to optimize those. Consider taking some of those supplements. It's not a bad idea to coordinate with someone who knows what they're doing with this sort of protocol and to get some advice and to help you get, to help you optimize and direct the right testing and right care.
What about nicotine without tobacco as a neuroprotectant?
Somebody mentioned about nicotine as a neuroprotectant. So many of you know that nicotine can be obtained through cigarettes, which is not a great way to do it. But these days, there's many other ways to get it, in particular things like gums or lozenges that can be safer. Nicotine is a neurostimulant. I have not seen good data in the literature to tell me that it's a neuroprotective, but some people use it. Some people use it as a safe stimulant, and I think that can be appropriate if it's used, in limited amounts. The neat thing about nicotine in regards to the stimulant, nicotine itself does not cause cancer. It's the tobacco, right? Nicotine itself is a stimulant. It has a short half-life, where coffee has a half-life of hours, 4, 6, 8 hours in someone. Nicotine is just a couple of hours. So some people, when they want to, if they want to get have some increased stimulation in cognitive function, they might use it and then be able to go to sleep a couple hours later, which is generally good. But most people don't need to use that. There's a question about Prevagen, which is a supplement. I see this routinely on the nightly news. I see no supportive evidence, no valid evidence from major research centers that Prevagen is used in prevention of Alzheimer's disease. I do not recommend it. I think it's a waste of money, and it's not been validated in major studies. And it's certainly not used as a part of, for example, the Weill Cornell Preventive Alzheimer's Clinic protocol, or the one by Dr. Bredesen.
How are Alzheimer's disease and dementia?
The question is how is Alzheimer's disease and dementia different? Dementia is the overall term. There are different causes for dementia, like stroke is a cause of dementia. Chronic alcoholism can be a cause of dementia. Alzheimer's is one of the kinds of dementias that are out there. And what we know about Alzheimer's disease is it's about 70% of dementias are related to Alzheimer's disease. So it's not all of them, but it's most of them. Dementia can be caused by other things as well.
What about ginkgo biloba?
The question is about ginkgo biloba. There's really not much great data that ginkgo makes a big difference in a person's brain health. There is some small studies, particularly isolates from ginkgo biloba. I think it has low side effects, and if it's something that a person would like to try, I think it's something that they might consider. But I'll tell you, the supplements that I listed, I hold in higher regard, significantly higher regard than I do ginkgo. And it's really just based on the data that's behind it.
What about using a home ketone for blood glucose monitor?
Somebody asked about using a home ketone or home blood glucose monitor to really understand their glucose well. You can certainly do that. Probably best to be working with a doctor if you're going to be doing that. But these days, there are home glucose monitors that you prick your finger and you put a small amount of blood on the test strip and put that in the little monitor, and you get your blood glucose. And then you can also do that with a blood ketones as well, and get a ketone level. These are available online. They're not terribly expensive, and they're relatively safe to use. You could use it without being directed by a physician, but probably best to be guided there, physician or provider of some sort. But really, the ketones in the urine are not helpful. Many people like previously to test those to find if they're in ketosis. Those are not adequate to tell you. You really need to use blood ketone levels to do that, and that is now available.
Caffeine. Is there a study on how it affects the brain's stress effects, cortisol? Does caffeine do the same? Should there be a limit for better brain health?
The question is about caffeine. And the good news about caffeine, and these are great studies, and I've actually done a recent review from work at Harvard by Dr. Frank Yu. Caffeine from coffee in particular is found to be generally healthy for many reasons. It actually improves cardiovascular health, decreases the risk of Parkinson's disease, decreases the risk of several different cancers. Moderate amounts of caffeine, coffee, 4 to 5 cups a day, can be quite healthy and not detrimental. Good for mood, good for brain health, good for depression. So it's okay to use, and it's not really shown to, be detrimental to brain health. Now, coffee, as we all know, some people are pretty sensitive to it. And if I were to drink 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day, I wouldn't sleep well. That would certainly affect my brain health and my stress level. So you have to make sure it's right for you. My father, on the other hand, drank coffee up until the time he went to bed at night, and he did quite well. So you have to individualize there what's right for you. But the data from medical studies tell us that caffeine from coffee is generally healthy for people. Hallelujah.
Do you know anything about the average cost of tests for brain health, specifically hormone tests or vitamin tests?
The average cost for these, it's hard to know. It depends on your insurance and what your insurance will cover. Many of these, these days you can get testing through your own insurance. And if you've got great insurance, it probably won't be terribly expensive. Most of these tests could be done for $300 to $500 or less. And in these days, there's also ways to pay for the testing yourself. That is directly cash pay. And sometimes that's even less expensive than going through your insurance. And that's something you can talk about with the folks at the clinic here, because we have a relationship directly with Quest that allows us to get some of these discounted if you don't use insurance, interestingly. So you just find out what's best for you, whether using your insurance is most effective and less expensive, or actually paying cash.
So what are your thoughts on protein powders from pea protein or whey protein?
The question is, what do I think about protein powders? Pea protein, whey protein, other sources of protein. I think they can be part of a healthy diet if they're used moderately. Most of us want to use we really want to eat whole food, real meat, real vegetables, real nuts and olive oil and fish and eggs and real dairy, real food. That's what we want to eat. Occasionally, if you need to add a protein shake, and I actually had a protein shake for dinner tonight because I didn't have, as I prepared for this, I didn't have much time. And yeah, whey protein is reasonable if you don't have any allergies to milk or milk products, and pea protein is certainly very reasonable as well. So yeah, I'm an advocate, get a good quality one. I wouldn't use it as a daily substitute for a meal. You want to eat real food, but I think it can be a healthy part of a diet, yes.
What do you think about drinking filtered water?
Filtered water is the next question. I say 2 thumbs up to that, because as I mentioned, there are potential toxins in the water. There can, I don't want to, our municipal water is generally good, but there can be metals. There can be some pharmaceuticals. There can be some agricultural chemicals, particularly in the Midwest here. So I think filtered water is a good idea. I think it's a nice insurance policy to take out for yourself. Yes. And the same thing with organic food. Not everybody can afford a filter. Not everybody can afford organic food. If you can afford it, it's a good idea. Yeah, and in regards to organic, there's the Environmental Working Group puts out the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So the things on the Dirty Dozen are often things like strawberries and grapes and so forth that are very likely to be contaminated. If possible, you'd want to buy those organic. And then there's a Clean 15, avocados, other things that are often not significantly contaminated, and you could probably get by without buying those organic. So if you go to the Environmental Working Group and look for the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen, they update that, if not, every few months, at least yearly. So that's a great source that you can.
And what about COVID brain fog after the infection?
The question is about COVID brain fog, and I do have some suggestions. For many things, the integrative approach in which you really focus on the pillars of health will make a difference. But in particular for the COVID brain fog, I really like the combination, making sure you have the right supplements, some omega-3s, and I like the combination of glycine, the amino acid glycine, that's glycine, with N-acetylcysteine, another amino acid. That combination at high dose at about 4 grams a day can make a difference in brain health, in the function of your mitochondria, in detoxification. And there's also going to be some time. It'll take, our brain and our bodies are designed to heal. So give yourself some time as well. We'll maybe take a couple more questions. I know people are probably ready to go.
Oh, should the keto diet be done under the supervision of a doctor?
The next question is about the keto diet, and should that be done under the supervision of a doctor? I think that's probably a good idea. There's certainly people out there that are healthy and they've read a lot about it, and they're going to use a low-fat diet, a low-carbohydrate diet, a higher-fat diet. But I think to do it well and to do it safely, better to work with a provider. And that was the last one. So thanks for joining us. The Integrative Medicine the clinic really enjoys bringing information like this, important information to folks of the community. If there's particular topics you'd like to have covered, you can let us know. Maybe we can do a lecture on those. In the future, we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about the next round about bone health, because I also have a great passion about that. And I think it's very interesting. I see one more question. Oh, thank you. Okay, so take care, everybody. I wish you all the best and a wonderful and lovely and safe spring.